So now it's time to run the fuel line. I went to town and I bought 12 feet of fuel line, and I ordered a low pressure fuel regulator because the pump I have is supposed to pump around 12 to 14 psi. But realistically, I only want like 4 to 5 psi into that carburetor. So the lower psi will make it so that it doesn't want to flood out on me. So I went to town and I bought some fuel line. So what we're going to do now is we're just going to start throwing the fuel line into the car. So it will have to be cut and everything, so I'm not too upset about that. But what we will do is we will throw the gas tank into the car, we will run the fuel line, we will plumb in the fuel pump, and then we will run the fuel line all the way to the motor. But what we're going to do is we're going to leave enough space in the interior so we can put the fuel regulator when we get it tomorrow. Now the fuel regulator that I purchased is a different design than my last one, but I really wasn't happy with my last one. My last one was like a $110 fuel regulator that had 2 outlets and 1 inlet in it. But on the outlets, one of them I mounted a gauge to tell me the PSI, and it never really read the PSI right, so I wasn't very happy with it. So I'm going to buy a different design where it's got a dial where you just turn it to the PSI you want. Again, I've never tried it, so we'll see how it works, but let's get throwing this inside the car. So for right now, all we're going to do is we're going to put our fuel tank into the car. So that was pretty easy. And then what we're going to do is we're going to run this fuel line like we would to the motor. So what we're going to do is we're going to come in through the interior. Now what I like to do with my fuel line is I like to keep it away from the door as far as I can. That way there, if somebody hits me hard in the door, it's not actually going to bust through. I'm going to go through the firewall where the heater used to be. That way there's lots of space and nothing should get in the way. And I'm just going to slide it onto the motor for the time being. So as you can see, that's already hooked up to the motor, but look at all the extra space that we have for the fuel line. And that's not a bad thing. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take our Holly pump and we're going to build a bracket for it, which is going to be extremely easy. The reason we're using this is because this is a pump that I actually have laying around from my old off-road truck days. It's pretty reliable. I've never really had an issue with it. I did take it apart once to clean it, and then I put it back together. I find these pumps to be pretty reliable and inexpensive for the most part. They're like maybe $120, but they're heavy duty and they last. And they pump fuel pretty damn good. I've bought some cheaper ones over the years, and every time I buy a cheaper one, I'm usually let down by it. So what we'll do is we'll weld a piece of angle and then drill a couple holes and just mount that right there. So let's get working on that. Well, this is the fuel pressure regulator I'm going to use this year. It says it's rated up to 350 horsepower and it fits 1 to 6 psi. Now, my first impression is it comes with everything you really need to install this, except a way to hold it down. So what we're going to do is we're just going to clamp the fuel line to the floor on both sides of it. Hope it's enough to keep it sturdy. I'm going to try to run it around 4 psi, I believe. So we'll figure out how to set it. Oh, I see, just this little arrow here that you turn. But we'll unplug it from the motor and see what the pressure feels like when we finally get the fuel pump up and going. But first impression is it's pretty heavy, and usually heavy means good. I know that sounds stupid, but when you get cheaper plastic parts, they're kind of flimsy and don't really take an abuse. This thing feels heavy. It's made by a good company, Mr. Gasket. So let's get this installed into the car. What we're going to do is just use the 5/16 threaded nipples, and we're going to put some Teflon tape onto it when we put it in there so it doesn't leak. So there you go. That's the entire fuel system installed. As you can see, the fuel tank, I added a small see-through inline fuel filter so I can see the fuel going through it. I have my pump, which is mounted, and it's away from anything that's going to smash it. The fuel line has lots of slack, so it can kind of get a little bit, it doesn't get taut and break. I have my fuel pressure regulator mounted right there on a rubber cushion, so that way it doesn't get vibrated too much. And then the fuel line goes through the firewall where the factory AC was. And then it comes through the firewall, away from any damage. Right here, it's got a little bit of a loop, but that'll all be pulled back inside, up to the motor. Now I will probably install another fuel filter right about here, or even back here just a bit, just to make sure I can see the fuel getting to the motor. But other than that, that is how simple it is to install a fuel line for a carbureted vehicle. On a fuel-injected vehicle, you will also have another line coming back from the return line all the way back to the tank. Now, what I like to do is, just in case I get rolled over, I have this tube here, which just goes right through the floor. So it acts as a vent, so when the fuel's getting sucked out of the gas tank, the thing does not pressure lock, because you're removing the fuel and there's now no air being added, so it could pressure lock. And the event that I get rolled over, this will stop the fuel from coming through the lid, because they'll just relieve the pressure out through the floor. So it's just a little something that I like to do. I don't do it on every vehicle, but I do it on a lot of them. It's super easy to do, and I find it's just something that helps out just a little bit. So there you go. Fuel system is in Project Burn Barrel.